You sign the lease at the kitchen table of your childhood bedroom, because that's still where the table is. $600 a month. Your mother watches you sign it, like she's watching you leave a second time. The room you're renting is 9 feet by 11 feet, in a house with 3 other tenants and 1 bathroom. And you tell yourself, this is temporary. The way everyone at this level tells themselves, this is temporary. Level 1, $600. This is not an apartment. It's a room, a lock, and a shared kitchen you've learned to use at odd hours to avoid conversation. The landlord's name is Otis, and he doesn't fix things quickly, because at $600 a month, across 4 rooms, he's not running a business that rewards speed. The faucet drips for 3 weeks before he sends someone. You don't complain twice. You've learned that at this level, complaining costs you more than the drip does. Your paycheck is $2,100 a month after taxes. Rent takes 29% of it, which sounds almost reasonable until you remember the number doesn't include groceries, gas, the phone bill, or the $340 minimum payment, still leaving your account for a credit card you opened during a leaner year. What's left over most months is somewhere between $60 and $140, and it disappears into small things you can't quite name afterward. The first rule: at $600, rent isn't your biggest expense. Rent is the thing that decides how much room is left for everything else. And right now, the room is almost nothing. Level 2, $950. You are 24. You've moved into a real 1-bedroom now, in a building with a buzzer that mostly works, and a landlord you've never met in person, only through an app that processes your payment and occasionally sends notices about noise complaints that aren't yours. Your friend Ren pays $700 for a similar unit 2 towns over, and every time she mentions it, you feel the specific irritation of someone doing slightly better at the exact same stage of life. $950 is 34% of your now $20,800 income, which crosses a line most lenders and most landlords consider the edge of comfortable, though nobody ever tells you where that line is until you've already stepped over it. You start noticing things you didn't notice at $600, because now you have marginally more to lose. A parking ticket feels heavier. A dentist bill feels like a small emergency instead of a manageable one. You're not struggling exactly. You are managing, which is a different thing, that looks similar from the outside. Your coworker Tobias asks how you're liking the new place, and you say it's great, because great is easier than explaining that greatness at this level means having your own bathroom, and still checking your account balance before agreeing to dinner plans. The second rule: the space between struggling and managing is thinner than people admit, and most of your 20s will be spent standing somewhere inside it. Level 3, $1,400. You are 27. You've moved for a job into a city where $1,400 gets you a 1-bedroom in a building with an elevator, a gym you use twice a month, and a doorman who knows your name because he has to, not because he's memorized it out of interest. Your income is $4,600 a month now, and the math finally starts to feel less like survival and more like a decision you're actually making. This is the level where rent stops eating you and starts becoming a line item you can plan around. You open a savings account for the first time that isn't just a leftover checking balance. You put in $200 a month, inconsistently, but you put it in. Your landlord this time is a management company, not a person. And when your dishwasher breaks, someone arrives within 48 hours. Not because they care about you specifically, but because the building operates on a service standard you're now paying enough to access. Your sister Marisol, still at $950, a level behind you, asks how you afford it, and there's a version of the question underneath the question, which is really asking whether you're doing something she isn't. You're not. You're just a few years and 1 job change ahead, and the gap between $950 and $1,400 feels enormous from where she's standing, and completely explainable from where you're standing. The third rule, at $1, $400. Rent starts buying you something besides shelter. It starts buying you responsiveness. The sense that if something breaks, someone will actually come. Level 4, $1,900. You are 30. You've moved in with your partner, Ines, and combined incomes change the math entirely, even though the apartment itself, a 2-bedroom in a decent but unremarkable building, isn't dramatically nicer than the 1-bedroom at $1,400. What's different is the ratio. Together you bring in $9,200 a month, and $1,900 is barely 21% of that. a percentage that would have seemed impossible 4 years earlier. This is the level where rent quietly stops being the main character of your financial life. You start thinking about other things: a car that isn't falling apart, a vacation that isn't funded by a credit card, a retirement account you finally open because a coworker mentioned a match you'd been leaving on the table for 2 years. The apartment itself starts to matter less than what surrounds it. You notice for the first time that you're not calculating rent against income anymore. You're calculating it against everything else you want the income to also cover. There's a night, a Tuesday, where the dishwasher breaks, and instead of stress, you feel mild annoyance, the kind reserved for inconveniences rather than crises. You don't call anyone about it in a panic. You add it to a list. That shift from crisis to list item happens quietly, and you don't clock it as significant until much later. The fourth rule. Somewhere between $1,400 and $1,900, rent stops being the loudest number in your life and becomes background noise, which is its own kind of milestone nobody throws a party for. Level 5, $2,600. You are 34. You and Ines have moved into a 3-bedroom, a real one, with a small office you both use and a view of something other than a parking lot. Combined income is now $14,000 a month, and $2,600 sits at a comfortable 18.5%. The kind of ratio financial advisors describe as healthy without ever explaining what unhealthy actually costs a person emotionally. This is where rent starts to reveal something else. Not stress, but choice. You could have paid less. You chose this specific building for a specific reason: proximity to a school you're thinking about for a child who doesn't exist yet, a commute that saves 40 minutes a day, a neighborhood where you don't think twice about walking home at night. Rent at this level isn't just shelter or even comfort. It's a series of small decisions about what your time and safety are worth to you. Your neighbor Callum, who owns instead of rents, occasionally implies that renting at this price is throwing money away, a phrase that assumes ownership is automatically superior without accounting for the maintenance costs, property taxes, and interest he pays that never show up in his casual comparisons. You've done the math. At $2,600, renting isn't a failure to buy. It's a decision that keeps your capital liquid, while you wait for the right property instead of the first available one. The fifth rule. At this level, rent stops being judged against your income and starts being judged against your options, which is a much more useful and much less discussed comparison. Level 6, $3,800. You are 39. The building has a name instead of just an address, a rooftop you use twice a year, and a leasing office that greets you by name because your renewal is worth protecting. Combined household income has climbed to $23,000 a month, largely from a promotion Ines took 2 years ago that neither of you fully celebrated because you were both too tired from the transition to notice you'd crossed into a different category of financial life. $3,800 is 16.5% of that income, a ratio so comfortable it barely registers as a monthly decision anymore. What's different here isn't the math, it's the treatment. The building manager calls to check in when a package is delayed. Not because policy requires it, but because tenants at this rent tier get proactive service instead of reactive service. A maintenance request gets same-day attention. A noise complaint about you gets handled with a polite note instead of a formal warning. You are, without ever announcing it, the kind of tenant a building wants to keep. You think back to Otis and the dripping faucet, to the 3-week wait, to the specific powerlessness of being one of 4 renters in a house where complaining cost more than it was worth. That version of your life is 13 years and $3,200 a month away from this one. And the strangest part isn't the money. It's how completely you've forgotten what it felt like to calculate whether a repair request was worth the risk. The 6th rule, at $3,800, you stop being managed and start being retained. And the difference between those two words is the entire distance between where you started and where you are now. Level 7, $6,000. You are 45. The apartment occupies most of a floor in a building, where the doorman knows not just your name, but your schedule, your dog's name, and the fact that you prefer packages held rather than left outside your door. Combined income sits near $41,000 a month, now largely from Ines's partnership at her firm and your own slow climb into a director role you didn't expect a decade ago. $6,000 is 14.6% of that, a ratio so unremarkable at this level that you genuinely had to check the math before writing the check this month, because you'd stopped tracking it as a percentage of anything. At this level, rent isn't a burden or even a decision anymore. It's an assumption, baked into a lifestyle you built one raise, one relocation, one negotiated salary at a time. You could buy. You've discussed it. But liquidity at this stage isn't a hedge against instability. It's a strategic choice, capital deployed elsewhere, in accounts and investments that outperform the appreciation of any single property, while the apartment itself remains someone else's asset and someone else's maintenance problem. A young colleague, Priya, mentions she's paying $1,450 for a studio across town and asks, half joking, how anyone affords a place like yours. You give her a version of the honest answer. It's not one big decision. It's 40 small ones, made over 20 years, most of which didn't feel important at the time. She nods, the way you once nodded, at people 13 years ahead of you, not quite believing the math would ever apply to her specific life. The seventh rule, at $6,000, rent has fully stopped being a measure of what you can afford and become a measure of what you've built everything else around. You think sometimes about the room at $600, the shared kitchen, the faucet that took 3 weeks to fix. You think about Otis, who probably still owns that house, still rents those 4 rooms to someone standing exactly where you stood, calculating whether a complaint is worth the risk. That person doesn't know yet what you know now, that the number on the lease was never really about the space. It was about how much of the world would respond when something broke, how quickly, and at what cost to your dignity. The rent didn't just buy shelter at any of these levels. It bought a different relationship with waiting, with complaining, with being seen or overlooked by the people who manage the roof over your head. Somewhere right now, someone is signing a lease at their kitchen table for $600 a month, feeling the specific relief of finally having a lock on a door. They don't know it yet, but the number will follow them for 20 years, changing shape, changing meaning, without ever fully explaining itself, until they're the ones standing 13 years ahead, trying to remember what it felt like to be afraid of a dripping faucet.